27th. It's going to be an historic day for South and North Korea as their respective leaders meet face-to-face for the first time in 11 years. Right now, we're going to go over to the summit's main press center in Goyang, just north of Seoul, where a super preview of the summit is just about to begin. The Seoul bureau chief of Reuters is going to lead a discussion with the experts. They're going to take up questions like how the summit came about, what it could possibly achieve, and what its limits are. And with the North Korea-U.S. summit in the works, how the two Koreas could prepare a middle ground for Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump.
Hello, welcome to our panel on 2018 Inter-Korean Summit. I am So-young Kim, Reuters Korea Bureau Chief. On the eve of the historic summit, we will be talking about its likely agenda, its meaning and significance, and its implications for international diplomacy surrounding North Korea's nuclear issue. We've got a great panel for that, and let me briefly introduce them. To my left, we have Professor Moon Jung-in of Yonsei University. He is also serving as President Moon Jae-in's Special Advisor on Foreign Affairs and National Security. To his left, we have Professor Lee Kun. He's with Seoul National University of Graduate School of International Studies, and he's an expert in inter-Korean relations and international politics of Northeast Asia. Welcome. Lastly, we have Professor John Delury. He's with Yonsei University Graduate School of International Studies, and he's got deep expertise in China and North Korea affairs. So I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you again for joining us today. Firstly, I'd like to take a step back and ask this question. How did we get here? Why is Kim Jong-un talking? Is it out of desperation because sanctions are starting to hurt the North Korean economy? Or is it out of confidence after Kim Jong-un claimed that his nuclear program is complete? I'd like to go to Professor Moon with that.
I think it is the result of his strategic decision. The rationale behind his strategic decision is that the North Korea wants to be a normal state. But one makes a normal state. I think North Korea has a confidence. And North Korea has declared that it has nuclear weapons on November 29th last year. Therefore, now North Korea has nuclear deterrence on the one hand, and second, North Korea wanted to be a normal state to make people happy. That in order to make people happy, what should North Korea do? North Korea should have economic reconstruction. Then that is one of the reasons why he pushed for it. But now here is an existential dilemma to Chairman Kim Jong-un. Chairman Kim Jong-un cannot have both economic development and nuclear weapons. Then he should sacrifice nuclear weapons in order to have economic revitalization in North Korea. Now, it's yet to be seen, therefore, during this summit between President Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un, as well as the summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un, he should answer to that question, whether he will make a real strategic choice to go for economic development at the expense of nuclear weapons. If he makes the decision, then we can see ray of hope on the Korean peninsula.
Professor Lee, would you like to add to that?
I have a somewhat different interpretation because on national security matters, you don't write best case scenarios. You usually write worst case scenarios. North Korea developed its nuclear weapons for a very, very long time, and it declared completion of its nuclear program last year. And this year, North Korea again declares, destroying its own nuclear weapons, nuclear program. That is, commonsensically speaking, very, very unimaginable thing in terms of national security affairs. So my interpretation is that North Korea made a strategic decision to focus more on economic development while having deterrence capability. North Korea, I do think that North Korea now thinks that they showed off enough of its deterrence capabilities. So perhaps now North Korea has to concentrate more on economic development. I think to answer your question, how we can get here, I think it's President Trump's magic wand. Without President Trump's acceptance of invitation, I think we would not have been here.
Professor Lee already addressed this point, but John, what do you make of North Korea's announcement on the weekend that it's going to freeze all nuclear testing? Because a lot of experts noted that it didn't have any mention of North Korea actually willing to abandon its existing nuclear arsenal, and therefore North Korea was simply declaring itself a nuclear power. So do you agree with that?
Well, no, I'm not sure that I think that was a declaration by Kim Jong-un that North Korea is a nuclear state. I mean, they've declared that before. It's in their constitution. They've said it many times. So that was not the moment of North Korea declaring their nuclear state. And I understand the reasons for skepticism, especially among American experts. But you know, there is a certain degree of nitpicking. I mean, we need to step back and look at what Kim Jong-un did before both summits. He announced that he would stop the nuclear testing, close the site, open it up probably to inspection, since he said he would do it transparently. But equally importantly, he said no more ICBM tests and no more IRBM tests, so people in Guam can go to sleep at night and safely. So these are positive steps. These were actually the kinds of things we were looking for in the wake of the summits. And Kim Jong-un did those before the summits have even started. So I think a lot of the skepticism and cynicism is based on a mistaken assumption that that's it, you know, that that's all he's going to do. That could be the case, but I think that's unlikely. I think that it was basically a goodwill gesture, a positive step, and we're going to see more of it. So.
But the whole starting point for this development is really Chairman Kim Jong-un's remark to our special envoy, Ambassador Jung Yong and Dr. So-hun. Chairman Kim Jong-un made it very clear to our special envoy that if there is no military threat, no threat to regime, then there's no reason for North Korea to have nuclear weapons. And denuclearization is the will of his grandfather and father. Okay? Given that statement, I think that statement is the most important starting point for current development. That is why we are having hope that there could be a real denuclearization of North Korea. Of course, it should be proved through the actual words and action. And what we need is actions from North Korea. That I hope that both summits, Moon Jae-in, Kim Jong-un summit, as well as Trump, Kim Jong-un summit, would prove that the North Korea would come for this denuclearization efforts.
So you talked about the security guarantee. So I wonder, what do we mean by security guarantee in practical terms? Because in past failed nuclear negotiations, North Korea demanded that the United States pulled its troops out of South Korea and also remove the nuclear umbrella deterrence from South Korea, but also Japan. Recently, President Moon said that actually North Korea is not looking for that this time around. What is the evidence of that? I mean, they didn't talk about it, but they could always talk about it again.
But what is interesting this time is that North Korea did not mention about the withdrawal of American troops as a precondition for denuclearization. As also, North Korea didn't mention the lifting American nuclear umbrella from certain parts of Korea. What North Korea wanted is verifiable dismantling of American nuclear weapons in South Korea, which does not exist. Okay? And also what North Korea wants is United States and South Korea would not deploy strategic weapons during the ROK-US combined joint exercise and training. And at the same time, North Korea wants assurance from the United States would not undertake conventional nuclear threat against North Korea. And then, peace treaty, and finally normalization of diplomatic ties between Washington and Pyongyang. But all these preconditions can be acceptable to the eyes of President Trump. Perhaps that is why President Trump made a very drastic decision to have talks with North Korea. Otherwise, there is no reason for President Trump to have a summit with North Korea.
I think one of the security guarantees for North Korea is, I think normalization is a very, very important security guarantee. For example, Japan was USA's main enemy during the Second World War. Germany was also the main enemy during the Second World War. China was the main enemy during the Cold War, and the USA fought war with Vietnam. But after normalizing its relations with all those countries, these countries do not have any, feeling of threats coming from the USA. So if North Korea normalizes its relations with the USA, Japan, South Korea, and creating a very comfortable environment around the Korean Peninsula, I think the security guarantee will be there. So the real key to the security guarantee is a normalization. Inviting North Korea as a normal country to the international order. That's the key, I think.
Could you weigh on that, John?
Yeah, well, I agree. And I would kind of combine those 2 points to say that there are military aspects to a security guarantee, the kinds of steps that Professor Moon is talking about. And then there's a political dimension to it, which I think is what Professor Lee is talking about. And really, it's going to require both, But when the North Koreans say, drop your hostile policy and your nuclear threat, it does have implications for the US nuclear umbrella, that's true. But of course, if North Korea is denuclearizing in a sincere way, South Korea does not need the kind of US nuclear protection against a North Korean nuclear threat, right? So, I mean, the issue here is going to be, we're going to have to handle both a political dimension of changing the relationships very fundamentally, moving them out of their current hostility into neutrality and cooperation. And that's going to manifest on the ground in military ways, in terms of how forces are positioned, how we conduct joint exercises, and how we move from tension to reducing risk, building confidence, and that's, I think, the process that we talk about, that's peace building, that's creating a peace regime.
In fact, I asked one North Korean that, really, what is meant by security guarantee? To my understanding, North Korea, the United States does not have an intention to undertake military attack on North Korea. Then what kinds of evidence do you want? And North Korean answered me very interesting way. Okay, let us have diplomatic normalization. Simply put, let us have Trump Tower along the Daedong River, and let McDonald's flourish in the street of Pyongyang. Let American-led consortium would come to North Korea, have a big business operations. If those things happen, then we'll feel safe. Therefore, it's not only just military and political threat, but what they really want is a feeling of safety coming from the United States that can be manifested in terms of real economic transactions between North Korea and the United States.
So at what point would Trump be willing to consider such economic benefits for North Korea? Because is he not going to do anything until he sees the proof of CVID complete and irreversible, verifiable denuclearization?
If North Korea complies with CVID, okay, in very short period of time, then I think that Trump is more than willing to give that kinds of economic incentives to North Korea.
So do you have a sense of what kind of a short time frame Trump would want?
Maybe Professor Ligon is expert on that one, then you can answer to that question.
I don't have a time frame in my mind. I cannot read President Trump's mind, but as Professor Moon said, it should be a very, very short period of time. Otherwise, it's going to be, again, a very, very long, complicated negotiation process.
What is your guess, John?
Well, I also cannot get in the mind of Donald Trump. But I'm not sure. We say fast, it has to be fast. And certainly from an American perspective, we want it as quickly as possible. But we have to be realistic. If you're Kim Jong-un, if you're his elite, if you're the North Korean people, the country, insofar as they feel protected by that, or part of that state, there is a danger in going too quickly for them. And this process of economic development does not happen overnight. So there is going to have to be a pacing and a calibration. What I'm looking for more are very concrete steps, ones that skeptics, even skeptics, can't really nitpick, where the North Koreans are taking clear demonstrable steps. They're giving up pieces of their arsenal. They're declaring their capabilities, and experts can rest assured that this is what they have. They're freezing it, they're giving it up. But in terms of the timing, that's what a lot of, I think, the negotiation is going to be, is where can the two sides find timing that works.
But I think of in very simple terms. President Trump's term will be end within less than 3 years, right? 2.5 years. Then North Korea should deliver CVID in 2.5 years. That would be acceptable to President Trump. But as John pointed out, it is not easy to go through freeze, declaration, challenging inspection, and verifiable dismantling. From technical terms, it would take more than 2.5 years. There is a real dilemma with regard to the CVID in North Korea.
But the problem with North Korea with the time frame is that all these American policies can be reversed by the change of the government. For example, there was an ABC policy by George W. Bush, anything but Clinton. And Donald Trump, President Trump is now taking the policy of anything but Obama. So even if North Korea does whatever it has to do within 2 or 3 years, if the next administration is, for example, a very hawkish American administration, then that administration may reverse all the policies. Then North Korea will be completely disarmed, not gaining anything. So that is a risk factor for North Korea.
I think that is why any kind of arrangement or agreement between Washington and Pyongyang should be embedded in some form of multilateral assurance. Otherwise, North Korea would not bite what the United States offers. That is why there got to be bilateral agreement between the U.S. and North Korea on the one hand, and there got to be some kind of a multilateral system to make sure that that agreement would work.
That is the best case scenario, but take a look at President Trump. He's a unilateralist. He ignores multilateral framework, Paris Accord, WTO, multilateral trade agreements. He simply ignores it. So North Korea, even if there is a multilateral guarantee of the previous policies, I think North Koreans would be very, very concerned about the reversal of the policies.
You make a very valid point, but it's hard to imagine a more hardline national security advisor than John Bolton.
Yes.
So if this administration, and Mike Pompeo is not a dove, so if this administration and this current team of Trump officials can negotiate a deal to their satisfaction, yes, the North Koreans are going to have that work because that's a structural concern for the North Koreans who are dealing with democracies who turn over, their governments quickly by North Korean standards. So we always have that problem in diplomacy with North Korea. But this is about as hawkish, as hardline an American administration as you can get. And so if this administration can find a deal and can sign a deal, from a North Korean perspective, it's about as credible a starting point as you could have.
But no administration coming after Trump administration would as bad as Trump administration in complying with international norms, principles, and rules. That is why if President Trump makes a real deal with North Korea, there is very little chance that would be rebuked by the following, succeeding administration in the United States.
I hope that would be the case, but we had Nixon, we had George W. Bush, and now we have Trump. This is the third time Americans voted for the unilateralist. So there's still is a risk factor.
In American history of American foreign policy, big deals were made by the Republicans. Look, Nixon's deal with China, the Shanghai Communique in February 1972. Only Nixon could do it. If the leader were Democrat, I really don't think he or she would come up with a major compromise with China. Therefore, we can still have a hope on President Trump.
About the possibility of this round of bilateral talks turning into an eventually multilateral framework, I'd like to hear, John, your view on the role that China can play here, because the world was taken by surprise when Kim Jong-un made a secret visit to Beijing. Why at this point in time, and what can China do?
Yeah, it's a critical question because I think the three direct parties to this conflict that we're trying to resolve or make progress on are clearly the Americans and the two Koreas. And the current configuration is somewhat new, somewhat unique, in that it's so concentrated in this trilateral format, and you have a new team of Kim, Moon, and Trump driving this process forward. And there's a certain irony as someone, if you've watched the Chinese position has always been, for any progress in North Korea, the Americans have to start talking to Pyongyang. Well, now the Americans are talking to Pyongyang. The CIA director literally flew to Pyongyang and had lengthy meetings with Kim Jong-un. And we're seeing China's nervous simply because they're not at the table. Yeah, just like Japan is nervous. Whoever is not included in this process is inherently nervous because everyone has a lot at stake. So I think from a diplomatic perspective, if we want progress, we face this dilemma that, one flaw in the six-party talks is there were too many people at the table. And it was and there was an awkwardness, and the process couldn't really get traction. So I think this current configuration has much better promise, where it's the two Koreas and the United States kind of blazing forward. At the same time, there have to be inclusive mechanisms of the kind Professor Moon was saying, I think in a much broader sense, to multilateralize a negotiation, but also diplomatically to keep China, and I would add Japan, as involved as possible. So strangely, I thought Kim Jong-un, what surprised me about his maneuver is he really kind of reached out a hand and brought Xi Jinping back into the mix, and gave China a little bit of an entree into this process, which helped deflate some of the anxiety, I think, in some circles in Beijing. And so I think the three parties need to keep doing that even as they drive forward.
Now, imagine what President Trump would have in his mind when he deals with North Korea. He should want that he made a big deal with North Korea. Okay? President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama couldn't fix North Korean problem, but I did it. There's the whole idea of making big deal. Second, he would want to come up with a big achievement that would say that now America is safe. Suppose President Trump persuaded Chairman Kim Jong-un to give up its intercontinental ballistic missiles in verifiable manner. Then that will make America safe, right? But President Trump would add one more point. That is what, I did all these things without spending a single penny. But how can you denuclearize North Korea without coming up with any kinds of economic and energy incentives? Then who should be taking responsibility for the economic aid and energy assistance to North Korea? Then China, Russia, South Korea, Japan, European Union. If other actors are bound to engage in this process of denuclearization of North Korea. Therefore, in this sense, it is important to have a bilateral settlement between Washington and Pyongyang, but it is equally important for other actors to involve in making this deal sustainable.
It feels like Japan is a bit of an odd man out in this diplomacy. If you look at one of the interesting things about North Korea's weekend announcement was they didn't mention short-term, short-range missiles there. And I wonder if there are growing fears within Japan that Washington and Pyongyang might have a nuclear deal that leaves the short-range and mid-range missiles intact.
The plenary session of the Korea Workers' Party, which was held on April 21st, mentioned the suspension of intermediate range and intercontinental ballistic missiles. Therefore, intermediate range missile refers to Nodong missiles that can aim at Japan. Therefore, some of Japanese concerns has been addressed by the Korea Workers' Parties in the plenary session. The real concern is for South Korea. We are under the North Korea's short-range ballistic missile threat, Scud missile threat. Therefore, I hope that our president can fix that problem while he's meeting the chairman Kim Jong-un tomorrow.
But I'll jump in here. We have to be realistic in our expectations of what we're talking about. I mean, we are not talking about the unilateral disarmament of North Korea, that they're going to vow to not have a military, right? So you can't go into this negotiation saying, okay, you got to give up your short-range missiles as well. I mean, is anyone else in this region going to give up their short-range missiles, let alone other capabilities? So there needs to be a hierarchy and a prioritization. You have to keep a focus. Even the ban, the prohibitions on their ICBMs are related to their nuclear program. So we do have to keep a focus, kind of eyes on the prize in terms of those capabilities, and be realistic that you're still going to have an armed, potent North Korea, even in a kind of best case scenario, just like South Korea is formidable, Japan is formidable, let alone China and Russia.
I think that's why the definition of denuclearization is very important. I think in the mind of American negotiators, CVID is the definition of denuclearization. But in the minds of North Koreans, they may have a different interpretation or different definition. And if North Korea's definition is just denuclearization without giving up its delivery systems, for example, missiles, mid-range missiles or short-range missiles, then North Korea is going to be still armed, and North Korea will be, to a certain extent, feel comfortable against the threats coming from American allies or Japan or South Korea. But if that's the case, Japan would be really concerned, and perhaps they would drag American negotiators' foot, and that may slow down the negotiation process. So that, again, that is a hurdle. North Koreans would be completely disarmed if CVID includes everything. So perhaps...
No, the CVID is concerned about just nuclear facilities, nuclear materials, and nuclear weapons.
Right.
It doesn't really touch a delivery vehicle. We need separate kinds of negotiation with North Korea. But if you go back to 1992 Declaration on the Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, the concept, definition of denuclearization has been very clearly defined. That is what? No testing of nuclear weapons, no manufacturing, no deployment, no strategy, no use of nuclear weapons, and also no possession of enrichment facilities and reprocessing facilities, which are essential for the production of nuclear materials, both plutonium and uranium. Okay? If we follow that definition of denuclearization, denuclearization is all about just nuclear facilities, materials, and weapons. But along with it, we can have a negotiation with North Korea how to get rid of the potential source of threat, including short-range, intermediate-range, and intercontinental ballistic missiles.
So do you think within a very short time frame, is it okay to allow North Korea to possess some of its mid-range and short-range missiles?
Not whole point. If North Korea get rid of nuclear weapons, what's the big threat coming from the short and medium range and intermediate range missiles?
Well, they can put chemical weapons, they can put biological weapons, they can...
We'll have another round of
right.
negotiation to deal with the biochemical, weapons of North Korea. But now let us focus on nuclear weapons,
And that negotiation would also presumably be reciprocal. So South Korea would have to give up in kind what it wants North Korea to give up. So you also have to think how many security sacrifices is South Korea willing to make. So again, I think keeping the focus on what is the real issue, both in terms of the violation of the non-proliferation regime and how there is a UN Security Council mandate to put all this pressure on them, it all derives from their possession of nuclear materials.
But devoid of nuclear weapons, North Korea's Scud missile or Nodong missile, they all become conventional weapons.
Yes.
Then we can deal with North Korea. But what really worries us is about whole nuclear weapons.
I mean, I would like to be optimistic, but as a scholar, I try to address some of the skepticisms. As Song-young said, Japan is addressing the problem of mid-range missiles and short-range missiles because these missiles are threatening to their own country. But if, as John said, if it's going to be a reciprocal processes, then North Korean leader and South Korean leader has to have a very, very strong grip upon their own domestic political processes. There will be resistance from North Korea's military. There will be resistance from South Korea's military because we are reducing our weaponry. So again, this is going to be a very, very sensitive issue.
Well, and I'm not sure the two Koreas want to go on that route because this is not just about the two Koreas in a vacuum.
Given a very short time frame.
Right, but again, do the two Koreas want to disarm to that point? Because they're not just dealing with each other. They're dealing with a region that already poses some challenges and threats and could evolve in the future. So it's not, CVID is not complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament. It's denuclearization. And I think we need to keep that focus.
But if that happens, then in terms of conventional weapons, we can go through the stages of tension reduction, confidence building, and we can talk about the so-called arms control, and eventually arms reduction. Therefore, no South Korea will go through that process. In that process, Japanese security concern can be disappeared. Okay? Therefore, let us think in simple terms. But therefore, now priorities on the North Korean nuclear weapons.
Yes.
Professor Moon, what you seem to be saying it seems somewhat different from what Washington is looking for when they talk about CVID. How well the two countries are coordinating, I wonder whether the two countries see eye to eye when it comes to denuclearization.
There's a complete agreement between Washington and Seoul on the definition of denuclearization. Okay? Then there could be issue of whether to include the delivery vehicles or not. But the American primary concern is nuclear weapons with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Therefore, the United States will push for this verifiable dismantling of ICBM. Okay? But with regard to definition of denuclearization, there is a complete 100% agreement between Washington and Seoul. And also, I think even North Korea should have that kind of understanding. Okay? But on the definition of denuclearization, there cannot be different interpretations. Just simply get rid of nuclear weapons, period, in verifiable way.
I'll switch gears a little bit and talk about tomorrow's summit. Whatever North Korea's intentions are, from South Korea's perspective, it will be important to try to seize the rare opportunity for dialogue and make the most of it. So I wonder what should be South Korea's expectations and objectives going into tomorrow's talks. Professor Lee?
I think Professor Moon has a lot more information than I do, so I think it's your turn.
No, go ahead. I don't want to monopolize the talks here.
Well, I think there are three main agendas. One is denuclearization. The second is peace settlement on the Korean Peninsula. And the third one is improvement of inter-Korean relations. And out of these three agendas, denuclearization is the priority. So within the official document, there has to be some kind of statement which emphasizes upon denuclearization. If it's going to be CVID, I think that's the best scenario. If it's not, I think there should be North Korea's intention to denuclearize its nuclear weapons within a very short time frame. But I do think that North Korea would suggest its own denuclearization plan with some conditions. I think these conditions are the things that matter.
John?
Well, Professor Lee is more optimistic on this one than I am. I'm not expecting so much in terms of stated commitments to denuclearization or the phrase CVID appearing, say, in the declaration. I think that's really moving into the second summit and what we could see, what we should expect out of a Kim-Trump meeting. I think that the focus, especially in terms of kind of publicly and with the declaration of tomorrow's meeting, I would expect it to be on the peace and improving inter-Korean relations, because that's where the two Koreas own it a lot more. And they already have agreements that they can easily reaffirm. They can add a twist to that, but it's a new leader in the north, Kim Jong-un. It's a new leader in the south, so they can somehow put their mark on that. It could be a kind of peace declaration, although they've made those in a way before, you know. So, but I think in a way tomorrow, in my interpretation, is more about these two leaders sizing each other up, getting a fix on, you know, what's the political will to really move, and then start moving, you know. So I think the significance of having it right up there at Panmunjom is you can do this again in 6 months or in a year. And especially that second meeting is really a more roll up your sleeves. How do we do? What did we say we were going to do last year? What do we tell our teams, our militaries, our diplomats that they should do, and how much of it did they get done? You know, so still there's so much weight is on the second summit that maybe they can't push the inter-Korean agenda as far along as they might like to. But still, I would focus external expectations are more on peace and improving inter-Korean relations.
Well, I disagree. First of all, the government kept saying that denuclearization is going to be the priority for this meeting. And then this summit meeting is going to be a bridge toward the US-North Korea summit meeting. Therefore, denuclearization is a main thing. So unless denuclearization is in the official statement, I think it's going to be a failure. And if it looks like a failure, then President Moon is going to lose a lot of its political capital.
No, but you know, the way I understand your question is this: what does North Korea want from the summit, right?
No, what does South Korea want from the summit?
No, they pointed out that what South Korea wants is, you know, President Moon might want to have North Korean leaders' commitment to denuclearization in written form. Then there is a big progress compared with the past. Okay, and obviously, when President Moon can get that kind of commitment from the Chairman Kim Jong-un, then he can have a much more meaningful discussions on peace settlement and inter-Korean, you know, improvement. But here, North Koreans might have want economic benefit from this summit, but our government sent a very clear message to North Korea. We are not interested in economic side this time. Therefore, no ministers from economic in the ministry attending the summit talk. Okay? Therefore, North Korea should have a very clear understanding that unless both North and South Korea make a progress in nuclear issue and peace issue, then there won't be any, you know, improvement in inter-Korean economic relations. And also, I think that our government does not want to send the wrong signal to Washington that you know, we could just you know, maneuver to evade the United Nations Security Council in the sanction resolutions of American, you know, independent, you know, unilateral sanction measures. But no, we'll be complying with international sanction regimes. Within that structural constraint, we'll be dealing with North Korea. And also, I understand that North Korea is aware of our limitations too.
Thank you so much. We've hit a 37-minute mark, so I'd like to go to the audience and take a couple questions. Could you raise your hands if you have a question and identify yourself, please? The gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. Martin Dimitrov from capital Bulgaria. My question is, we have the news from last 24 hours that President Macron is not really certain that President Trump will maintain to the Iran nuclear deal. What kind of message does this send, and how does it relate to Mr. Moon and Mr. Lee's comments earlier on the reliability of Mr. Trump on longer term basis? Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a very good question. Okay, if the Iranian deal gets derailed, that it will have a very negative implication for North Korea, because North Korea will think that the United States may not keep up with its international agreement. But on the other hand, the Iran deal was done by President Obama, okay? But North Korean deal will be President Trump's deal. Therefore, he may keep his deal with North Korea, if not, even if he doesn't keep the deal with Iran. I answer in that way.
But I do think that the Iran deal, if it's going to be canceled, it would deliver a very negative signal to North Korea because, as Professor Moon said, a security guarantee has to be provided multilaterally. And Iran deal was a kind of multilateral guarantee of the agreement. But if it was broken by a unilateralist in the United States, I think it would send a very negative signal to North Korea. And at the same time, the Harris, the ambassador, who is going to be the new ambassador to Korea, he's a very, very hawkish person. And John Bolton is also very strong. Pompeo is also very strong. So there are a lot of negative signs within the Trump administration. But I hope for the best. I hope for the best.
I think we have perhaps time for one more question. The gentleman also in the middle, fourth row.
Thank you, Bang Jusuk, ITN News, United Kingdom. First of all, we'd better clarify the definition of the denuclearization because there are big differences between United States and North Korea. United States just demand North Korea's complete denuclearization by CVID, while North Korea demand denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which might be deeply concerned with complete withdrawal troops from the Republic of Korea. United States should make withdrawal troops from South Korea, which might be a little bit tension under current situation. Do you think it's possible to reach an agreement, even though the two leaders have quite different denuclearization process? Thank you.
John?
Well, yeah, we keep talking about the issue of definitions. I don't think it's a problem of definitions. And at least I don't think that North Koreans are confused about what the Americans mean, and I don't think the Americans are confused about what North Koreans mean. I think it's an issue of, as your question implies, it's an issue of pacing, verification, and what's the trade-offs. So if we're expecting the North Koreans to really give up their capabilities, which they consider a deterrent, which they very legitimately consider a deterrent, let's be honest, then how quickly, go back to our earlier conversation, how quickly do we expect them to do that? How are we going to be sure it's really happening? How are we going to verify it? And what are they going to get? We talked about Kim Jong-un's ambitions to develop his economy, but we've also said we're not going to lift sanctions until we see real progress. So that's an obvious dilemma that has to be negotiated. North Korea, it is their deterrent, and therefore if we seriously expect them to give it up, then it has to be in their self-interest. They have to feel safer without their nuclear weapons than with their nuclear weapons, or at least equally as safe. So what are we going to give them? How are we going to ensure them of that? And how quickly can we do it? We keep saying, how quickly will they give up their nuclear weapons? Well, how quickly are we prepared to make it in their self-interest to do so? So I don't think it's definitions. I think it's pacing, verification, and what are the trade-offs?
Because we are nearing the end of the session, I want to propose something. North Korea's nuclear issue has remained a problem for decades, and despite years of nuclear negotiations, we are still where we are. So I wonder if there is a way to think outside the box and maybe talk a little bit about any creative solution that possibly we should be thinking about. So on this, I'd love to hear from each of the panelists, and you are given roughly, I think, 2-3 minutes to give your opinions and wrap up your thoughts, starting with John.
Okay, 2 to 3 minutes for the
we have
not the grand solution, but out of the box. I think it's important to do that because I think for this kind of diplomacy to work, we need to be a little bit more creative. One idea I've been batting around in my own head is it has to do with the issue of Iran. The critiques of Iran in the United States by the Trump administration, a big part of that critique is it's too complicated. and people don't understand it. And so I think one of the things we should be thinking about is how do you simplify this deal that we're talking about with North Korea. And so one simple form, it wouldn't solve everything, but if you focus on the arsenal, is if you can get an initial declaration and verification so that we're comfortable knowing the total number of weapons in their arsenal. Let's say it's 20, which would be a low number, but let's say we're confident it's 20. Then you set up a process over a couple of years, maybe in time for the end of Trump's first term, maybe you have to push it to the end of his presumed second term, but where each year on Christmas Day, North Korea transparently destroys 3 bombs in their arsenal. And if they have 20, then by the end of the second term, they have verifiably eliminated their arsenal. And in return, there could be a very big package that they get equivalent to that amount of 3 bombs. And it would have an economic dimension to it. So that's one sort of little bit out there idea. But it's an idea that I've been thinking about to think about how we can move this forward in terms of eliminating the arsenal.
Well, I have an idea which is as simple as his, but mine is a lot shorter. He has 6 years, mine is just 1 year. I wrote an article about this about a month ago on Gyeongyang Shinmun, and my suggestion is U.S.-North Korea military alliance. If U.S. and North Korea agrees upon military alliance, then the security guarantee is going to be provided immediately, and North Korea will be under America's nuclear umbrella. And since Americans will be on the territory of North Korea, they will take care of North Korea's nuclear program, nuclear weapons. And then there will be a lot of information exchange between North Koreans and Americans, so confidence will build up. And South Korea has military alliance with the USA. North Korea has military alliance with the USA. Therefore, inter-Korean relations will also improve. There will be a problem about Chinese concern, but we can ameliorate Chinese concern by having a lot better relations with China in terms of economic exchanges, in terms of cultural exchanges, and so on and so forth. And perhaps by the end of the day, we can also withdraw THAAD. Then that will solve some of the Chinese concern. So this is my out-of-the-box suggestion.
But military alliance against whom? Military alliance
it's like NATO.
Should have a rationale in terms of a common enemy and common threat. What kinds of common threat and common enemy come up with? Do you think that South Korea and North Korea can regard China as a common threat?
No, like in NATO, we have alliance against uncertainty, alliance against future threats, alliance against instability in the region. So we can be creative about the alliance, the purpose of the alliance. This is out of the box, suggestion.
What is your out-of-the-box suggestion?
I think, in fact, the current development is North Korean creation. North Korea has initiated current process. North Korea has choreographed current process. Therefore, I really hope that North Korea would come up with a bold concession from the beginning. Maybe when Chairman Kim Jong-un meets President Trump, he can come up with, okay, I have this number of nuclear warhead. Okay, you can come and inspect, and I'll be more than happy to verifiably dismantle those bombs. That could be a very meaningful start. Therefore, in other words, tit for tat, old type of protracted negotiation will lead us to nowhere. Big concessions should come from North Korea, and China, South Korea, Russia, and other countries should come up with some kind of transitional security guarantee for North Korea. Then I think the President Trump will be able to persuade the American audience, Congress, so that he can come up with a bold reward to North Korea. Otherwise, it will be a very, very difficult process.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for a great discussion today. And I'd like to thank our audience and the viewers as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes our coverage of the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit Super Preview. So certainly a lively discussion and some thought-provoking points made. Do stay tuned for even more expert analysis, news, and interviews. It's going on 8 o'clock p.m. here in Seoul. We'll be back in just a few minutes.